Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla, and our story today is called The Gravel Pile Dare. Well, Paul, he was short, he was small, and the other kids tend to give him names like Shorty or other things that meant that he was little. Well, he hated that. So what he tried to do was he tried to do as much as he could that would show the other boys and girls that he was as big and as strong as they were. Some time had gone by, and Paul had went to a second-hand store, and he saw a very old, dilapidated bicycle. Well, he took what little money he had, and he bought that bicycle, and he brought it home. Well, when he brought it home, it was to be noted that it had 2 flat tires and tons of other things wrong with it besides the way it looked. But Paul, he started working on that bicycle, and by working hard and his dad working with him, pretty soon he had a bicycle that functioned quite well. Well, now he had to learn to ride it. Well, after many falls and tumbles with that old bicycle, he learned to be a pretty good rider. So now he had watched all the other boys that lived there in the little town he lived in, and pretty soon he started riding with them, and they would ride all over the countryside together. It was really quite fun. Well, then one day, they got down a road where there was a big hill that went down, and down at the base, pretty much, of that hill, there was a huge gravel pile. Well, the county workers used that gravel to work on the roads, but they kept it in a big pile. And every so often, the big dump trucks would come and they would dump more gravel there. Well, some of the gravel had been flattened out a little bit, but it was still a pretty good pile of gravel. Well, all the boys were sitting there in the grass looking at that gravel. And one of them said, "You know what? I think if somebody would go up that hill on their bicycle and get to the very top of it, and then ride down that steep hill as fast as they could go, what do you think would happen with this big pile of gravel if a bicycle hit it?" Well, all the boys knew what happened if you were on a road that had just been graveled and you were going fast and you hit that gravel. They all knew that was not a good thing. But none of them really knew what would happen to you or a bicycle if you were to come as fast as you could down a big hill and hit into the gravel pile. Well, at first, part of the boys said, "We can do it. Yeah, we can do it." But the closer it got to time for somebody to get on their bicycle and go up that hill and come down, all those boys kind of backed out. Well, it appeared that nobody was going to do it. And then Paul got to thinking, you know, if he could do things that they couldn't do. That would make him look bigger, and they wouldn't call him Pee-wee anymore or Grunt. So, with that thought in mind, he walked over to where the boys were sitting at the bottom of the gravel pile, and he said, "I'm willing to do it." And the boys looked at him kind of in amazement, and they really didn't think he would do it. Then he went over and he got that old bicycle, and he started to climb that big, tall hill. It was about a quarter of a mile up the hill, so that was a pretty steep hill. Well, when Paul got to the top, he turned around with his bicycle, and he looked down. It was a long ways down that hill. Might of fact, the hill was rather scary in itself, without the gravel pile at the bottom of it. But Paul thought, "I've said I would do it, and I'm going to do it." So he stood there and he looked around, he got on his bicycle, and he kind of held his breath, and he held the handlebars, and down over the edge he went. Well, at first the bicycle went kind of bumpy slow, and then it started to go faster and faster and faster. And the faster the bicycle went, the faster Paul went on those pedals. Faster and faster and faster down that hill. Pretty soon the wind was blowing by him, and he thought, "I think I wished I didn't say I'd do this." But he was getting close to the bottom of that hill, and he knew he couldn't stop then. So he pushed those pedals till they wouldn't go any faster. And straight ahead of him was that big pile of gravel, and he hit it at that horrible speed he was going. Boom! And of course, you know what happened. Gravel went everywhere. Well, his bicycle hit, and the wheel turned this way, and the whole thing disconnected from the back of the bicycle. And Paul, he didn't stop when he hit that pile of gravel. He flew right off of that bicycle. He flew over the gravel pile. He flew over the barbed wire fence. He went over that into the next pasture, and his body started to roll and roll and roll and roll. Well, when it finally stopped, he looked at his arms, and he tried to move them about. They appeared to not be broken. So then he wiggled his legs, he moved his feet. Well, nothing down there seemed to be broken, and his head was okay. So he stood up, and he saw all those boys, and the look on their faces was worth going down that horrible hill into the gravel, because they looked at him with admiration, like he really was something and he'd done something great. Well, he went over and he stood by them. He stood as tall as he could. And they seemed to really appreciate him now. He went over and he picked up the front wheel from his bicycle. And then he picked up the back part of it. And he started to pull that out toward the road. And then it happened. All of a sudden, all over him, there was these pains and prickly things and itches. First it started on his arms, And all he could think of was, I got a scratch. Then it was all over his chest and his neck and his legs and his feet and his hands. He couldn't hardly stand it. He had no idea what this was. But because the boys still looked so happy about his accomplishments, he didn't want to tell them. Finally, he found a good reason to say he needed to go home, and he really did need to go home. Well, when he got home, he put pieces of that bicycle into the garage, and then he went in the house. He didn't want to tell his mother that he'd accepted a dare to go down that hill into the gravel pile. And he didn't really want to tell her how he'd gone flying through the air. But he hurt so bad, and he itched so bad. And you know what? He had finally figured out what had happened to him. He lived in Tennessee, and there is a part of Tennessee that has little cactus plants. They kind of grow out like this on the ground. But sticking up out of their leaves are little spines or little hooks. And when he went rolling through that field, he rolled over a big patch of those cactus. I said he didn't want to tell his mother. Well, he really didn't, but then he realized he hurt so bad he had to tell her. Well, as he lay there on his bed, his mother got out the magnifying glass and she held it up and she looked through it, and with a pair of tweezers, she had to start pulling out those hundreds and hundreds of little spines from those cactus. Well, finally it was time to go to bed, but she hadn't gotten them all out. There was nothing more she could do right then. So he went to bed. There was no place that was comfortable. He could lay on this side and it hurt. He could lay on that side and it hurt. And his chest hurt and his back hurt and his legs hurt. He didn't know what to do. I mean, it hurt for the blankets to be on any part of him. Well, by the time morning came, those little spines that were still inside his skin started to fester up into big, big little sores. It hurt more than it had. The only advantage to the festering was it made it easier to pull them out. But my, was he miserable. And having all those little festering infected spots all over his body made him sick. For 3 days after that, he couldn't go to school. He was so miserable. Finally, most of those cactus spines were out, and he wasn't nearly as comfortable anymore, and he thought he could go to school, which he did. But on his way to school, he thought about some things. He thought about bicycles, and he thought about gravel piles, and he thought about flying through the air over fences and rolling in cactuses and the pain. And then, most of all, do you know what he thought about? He thought about dares. Now, kids for centuries have dared other children to do huge things. If you've ever noticed, generally the person that does the daring does not want to do it themselves, that tells you one thing. If somebody's daring you to do it, if they can get up there and do it themselves, then you might know that it might be halfway safe. But if none of them are willing to do it, it's something that shouldn't be done. Now, the next time that somebody dares you to do something like climb up on the barn roof and fly off, you tell them, you do it first. I don't want to. Be brave. Don't take a dare. Taking dares is not brave. Thank you, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.